US policymakers started arming freedom fighters. $8.5 billion of US military equipment fell into the hands of the Taliban,
resulting in a mess for Pakistan to have to clean up.
The United States relied usually in the war on terror on non-state actors.
It was a terrible mistake by the United States.
It is just criminal how the United States withdrew from Afghanistan.
We got caught in a very vicious circle. We are still trying to get out of it.
The international community have not spent as far as reconstruction and rehabilitation, and that plays a large part as to why we still face it.
Every war has a beginning. Not every war has an ending. At least, not for those left behind. The United States entered Afghanistan twice. Before that, it armed the battlefield from afar. And each time, without exception, it left. Not in defeat, not in chaos, but by choice. Pakistan did not have that choice. Bound to a 2,500-kilometer border, it could not fold away. Burdened with refugees, it did not invite. Drawn into a war, it did not start. Pakistan inherited the fire and was blamed for the smoke. This is not a story of good intentions gone wrong. It is a story of decisions made in Washington, consequences absorbed in Islamabad. A nation, Afghanistan, abandoned not once, but twice. While another, Pakistan, was left to manage what that power walked away from. This is the story of the consequences faced by Pakistan after the war. This is the story of global powers and players who used Afghanistan and the region for their objectives, and then, after achieving them, or losing interest, shifted policies. They were called freedom fighters. They were armed, funded, glorified. Then they were called terrorists, hunted, bombed, eliminated. US shifted policies, twice. Twice Afghanistan burned. Twice Pakistan paid. In December 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. What followed was not just a war, but a covert international project. Under Operation Cyclone, West, in collaboration with Gulf states, funneled billions of dollars into arming, training, and mobilizing fighters against Soviet forces.
US policymakers started arming the Afghan Mujahideen freedom fighters. I don't think there was really much awareness that there might be a problem down the line. The main goal was to defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan, and that was it. And then, it worked. Brzezinski, who was the Carter's national security advisor, was asked this question many years later, and he said, "Look, winning the Cold War was, that was really the main goal here. Other factors were really not that important."
The objective was strategic, to weaken Moscow through a proxy war.
The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much as long as is possible.
Pakistan was not the architect of this design. It became the conduit, a frontline state by geography and a logistical corridor by necessity. Weapons, funding, and fighters moved through its territory. Training networks expanded. Madrasa systems grew. Funded externally, shaped by the demands of war.
The great game was being played between the erstwhile Soviet Union and United States of America. Well before the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, there was a movement which had started in Balochistan because the project was much bigger. The grand strategy at play was much bigger. It was not about just Afghanistan. It was eventually to come to Pakistan and get to the warm waters. Another movement was going on, which was again being supported from Afghanistan, and that was of Pashtunistan. And there was, of course, the Indian threat, which was on our eastern borders. So Pakistan was kind of caught between India and now the mighty Soviet power at that time had walked into Afghanistan. And what choices were there? So Pakistan chose to protect its sovereignty at all costs.
Fighters from across the Muslim world arrived. Among them, Osama bin Laden. They were called Mujahideen. In Washington, they were praised as freedom fighters. President Ronald Reagan hosted their representatives at the White House.
Soviets must not be allowed to region that aggression can succeed.
After 1979, there was the US support to Pakistan in the so-called Afghan Jihad, where the US pumped in $2.1 billion in assistance covertly to train 100,000 Afghan Mujahideen and 20,000 Arab volunteers, including Mr. Osama bin Laden, Dr. Aman al-Zawahiri. And Pakistan, of course, was a partner along with entire Western countries.
U.S. working very closely with Pakistan and a number of other countries as well to develop groups, provide support to religious actors mainly to fight the Soviet occupiers.
Pakistan's role was not ideological leadership. It was strategic alignment under pressure. In return, it received military and economic support, including advanced weapon systems and financial assistance. The Cold War dictated the terms. The Soviet withdrawal in 1989 marked a turning point, but not a resolution.
When the Soviets withdrew, they continued to provide a variety of assistances, including military assistance to Najibullah. And as a consequence, Najibullah was able to hang on for some 2 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union was no longer able to make those assistance payments, Najibullah's government collapsed quite quickly. So the lesson that should have been learned was how it was that Najibullah's government was able to hang on for as long as it did without Soviet troops, but also how quickly it fell when Soviet monies were no longer there. So there was unfortunately never any attention paid to making the Afghan government itself sustainable.
In 1989, the United States closed its embassy in Kabul, and I think that was a mistake. The Afghan war did produce blowback. It's not quite how most people sort of interpret it. I can't think of another situation which is as clear an example. Yes, I think.
Washington disengaged. No reconstruction plan. No disarmament strategy. No political settlement.
Operation Cyclone was one of many factors that led to this very long, difficult period of conflict in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan was left fractured.
Shortly after the conflict concluded, the Cold War context ended, the United States and other international partners believed that the USSR had fallen back, had broken. Then they also washed their hands and left this region, left Afghanistan to its fate and the people of Pakistan to its fate. That conflict had consequences for us, not only geopolitically, but also domestically.
Pakistan was left with the consequences. More than 3 million refugees, a region flooded with weapons, militant networks with no off switch. Out of this vacuum emerged the Taliban, capturing Kabul in 1996. What followed was not an accident of history. It was the aftermath of abandonment.
The creation of Taliban came as as a reaction, if you like, as a product of the situation in Afghanistan by early 1990s. At that time, the Soviet Union been defeated, withdrawn. Then Najibullah government have been collapsed in 1992. Then there was a sort of fraction between different factions in Afghanistan. The Talibs, which later called Taliban, the students, the religious students, have gathered themselves and founded that based on their Kandahar geographically location, and they were aiming to regroup all these factions in a one state, kind of, in a geographical space.
The 1990s were not a good period for Afghanistan, and we also saw significant levels of spillover. When you had conflict and unrest in Afghanistan, this definitely spilled over into Pakistan as well, which generated new challenges for Pakistan. And this is one of a number of reasons why Pakistan's relationship with the U.S. has been tough many times over the course of history. There is a perception harbored by many in Pakistan and articulated very explicitly by many members of the policy elites in the civilian and military side that the U.S. is happy to work with Pakistan and when it serves its interest, but when it doesn't, then the U.S. will just leave, resulting in a mess for Pakistan to have to clean up.
September 11th, 2001 changed everything. The same networks once supported were now declared enemies. The United States invaded Afghanistan in October 2001.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime.
This time, not covertly, but at full scale. What followed became the longest war in modern American history.
The people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work.
A coalition of over 40 countries under NATO command, hundreds of thousands of troops rotated through Afghanistan over 2 decades, aerial bombardment campaigns, drone warfare, counterinsurgency operations across mountains, deserts, and cities. Trillions of dollars spent.
We got caught in a very vicious circle, and we are still trying to get out of it. That's a tragedy. Everybody has gone back home and they're living happily thereafter. Only Pakistan is caught in this crossfire of history.
State-building efforts launched, constitutions drafted, elections held, institutions built, all under the shadow of war. It was not just a military campaign. It was an attempt to reshape an entire region, while fighting an insurgency that never fully disappeared. Pakistan, once again, became central. But this time, the alignment was not voluntary. Under intense international pressure, it joined the war on terror.
So Pakistan became partners with the United States and NATO because this was mandated by the United Nations. But what was happening at the same time, while Pakistan helped to curb terrorism all over in Pakistan and helped the forces in NATO forces and US forces in Afghanistan, but also Pakistan maintained a very important stance that all this has to come to an end through not just by a military maneuver, it had to come to an end through a political resolution. And that did not happen for too long.
Militant groups turned inward. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and affiliated networks launched attacks across the Pakistan. Cities, markets, mosques, and schools became targets of brutality.
So I think Pakistan certainly feels it's strongly felt by the Pakistanis that the United States abandoned Afghanistan in 1989, and they had a sort of blowback problem from various jihadist groups. On the other hand, well, I think, look, Pakistan's had a huge terrorism problem, and there's also, I think, something like 9,000 Pakistani soldiers have died fighting jihadist groups, and tens of thousands of Pakistani civilians have died in terrorist attacks carried out by Pakistani jihadist groups. So it's sort of a mixed picture, because Pakistan has certainly been the victim of terrorism, and there have been multiple terrorist attacks, and Pakistan has occasionally been taking very robust steps to fight jihadist groups based in the tribal areas along the Afghan border.
Pakistan's response was not optional, it was survival. Military operations intensified. SWAT, South Waziristan, North Waziristan. Over 80,000 lives lost. Economic losses exceeding $150 billion.
We lost so many people, about 100,000 people died in the war on terror. So we had the second number of fatalities outside of Afghanistan. And of course, much, much more than the collective losses of United States and its NATO allies.
In February 2020, the United States signed an agreement with the Taliban in Doha, setting the stage for withdrawal.
The U.S. had hoped to achieve positive outcomes, such as taking steps to end the conflict and have a government in place that was allied with the United States. But what happened? U.S. forces left after making a deal with the Taliban, the party that the group that they had been fighting for so many years, and they had to negotiate a deal to ensure that U.S. troops wouldn't be fired on as they were leaving the country. I mean, that to me is a reflection of tremendous failure, and I think it goes back to many years of bad policy and not being strategic about why the U.S. was even there.
In August 2021, that withdrawal came, and the Afghan state collapsed with unexpected speed.
The same mistake was made in 2021 when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. Now the Taliban controls the entire country, even more than they did before 9/11, because before 9/11 there was an anti-Taliban resistance that had a foothold in Afghanistan. But none of that exists today, and the $8.5 billion of U.S. military equipment fell into the hands of the Taliban, the United States left behind. So they're better armed, they're more radical, I think, this time around, which is hard to believe. But they've appeared to have legalized slavery, which is pretty old school. They appear to have also allowed men to beat their wives only up to the point where they don't break their bones. So this is these are sort of new Taliban rules as of January of this year. So yeah, I think the United States has made a mistake twice, which is leaving Afghanistan after achieving what it thinks its strategic goals are.
The Afghan National Army, built over 2 decades, disintegrated within days. Its structure had depended heavily on external support that vanished almost overnight.
It's the apotheosis of how the United States and its NATO partners were approaching the Afghan problem set. We always approached it through the number of troops. We never approached it through the lens of the sustainability of the Afghan state. So we built the largest rentier state that's ever existed in Afghanistan's existence. It is just criminal how the United States withdrew from Afghanistan without a credible Pakistani partner, without a capable Afghan partner. The occupation was going to have to come to an end at some point. But I would have liked to have thought that the occupation termination could have been a lot more thoughtful, a lot less safe, and quite frankly, would have taken into consideration all of the hundreds of thousands of Afghans that actually worked with the United States and NATO over the long duration of the occupation. they were completely forgotten. Under the Trump administration, they've been discarded completely.
Images from Kabul airport circled the world. A chaotic evacuation, a sudden end to a 20-year intervention.
August of 2021 by the Biden administration was a catastrophe, so this outcome is a shared mistake of Trump and Biden. I think if we had stayed in Afghanistan, we would have had a much greater chance of avoiding another terrorist attack on the United States. We've seen ISIS-K, since we left, we've seen them conduct terrorist attacks in Iran and in Moscow, two of the most closely guarded places in the world. It shows they have the reach to carry out terrorist activities far from Afghanistan. This is very, very dangerous. I wish we'd stayed. A lot of Americans didn't want an endless war. It wasn't so much we were at wars as that Afghanistan had been a place that we could say, we're sure there's not going to be another terrorist attack on the United States. We gave that up entirely. And for the people of Afghanistan, it's just been a descent back into the authoritarian rule Taliban had before 9/11.
But again, the consequences remained regional, and Pakistan faced renewed security threats from militant groups operating along the Afghan frontier. Large volumes of military equipment remained inside Afghanistan, estimated at over $7 billion. A political transition plan was absent. Millions were left to face an uncertain future. For the second time, the exit was decisive. And for the second time, the consequences were regional. Pakistan faced renewed instability, border tensions, militant resurgence, and continued refugee pressures.
Pakistan took the major part of the burden. We supported them in every way. Initially, in the early 80s, we saw a very generous support from World Food Program, from different UN agencies. But with time, their support started fading out. The more this support faded out, the more burden actually, given to Pakistan. So Pakistan is in many ways one of the biggest donors in terms of refugee hosting.
The UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, came to Pakistan. I had 2 meetings with him as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he told me something very important. He said the international community has been unfair to Pakistan because Pakistan has been a model host, hosting the largest number of refugees from Afghanistan for the longest duration in world history, 4 million people in 40 years. And he said that this role has not been appreciated by the international community, and the international community has not been fair to Pakistan.
The West pivoted away. Afghanistan was no longer strategic. Pakistan's strategic options narrowed significantly. Sanctions constrained the economy. Regional instability intensified. As the war intensified, its spillover reshaped Pakistan's internal security landscape. Militant networks turned inward. Pakistan launched large-scale counterterrorism operations. Command structures were dismantled, safe havens cleared, leadership networks targeted. The response extended beyond military action. De-radicalization programs were introduced, rehabilitation centers established.
When you inspire, motivate, radicalize somebody on religious sentiment, no matter which divine faith system, no matter which divine system, then re-radicalization takes a much longer time. And it is where Pakistan has done brilliantly well. They left the mess to Pakistan and walked off. But Pakistan not only managed that entire mess, Pakistan de-radicalized those elements also, who from Pakistan, because of religious motivation, joined their ranks.
Former militants were reintegrated into society. This effort unfolded without any global reconstruction framework, no Marshall Plan, no coordinated international support.
Pakistan has been very effective on kinetic levels, going after the terrorists that it chooses to go after. So after the TTP carried out this horrific campaign of violence that lasted nearly a decade, Pakistan launched this major counterterrorism offensive in the North Waziristan tribal region near the border with Afghanistan. And it killed a lot of bad guys. It killed a lot of terrorists. It degraded the capacities of TTP, and it did lead to a significant reduction of terrorist attacks inside Pakistan. Likewise, Pakistan has gone heavily after Al-Qaeda. It's gone heavily after Islamic State. Basically, it's gone heavily after the groups that threaten and target Pakistan.
Due to activities of militant outfits across the country, Pakistan was put on gray list of FATF in 2018. But by October 2022, it was removed. After implementing extensive counter-terror financing reforms and counter-terrorism operations, which is a recognition of sustained effort. But despite these developments, India continues to accuse Pakistan of sponsoring militancy and propagates against Pakistan. Pakistan rejects the claims.
Since the advent of Mr. Modi and his cronies in New Delhi, since 2014, it has been a gradual descent into a Hindu majoritarian state, and very clearly and very openly. And the ideas of making India like a Khand Bharat or so, in which rest of South Asian states do not figure out as equal sovereign partners, which is why SAARC has never taken off. And then look at just 2019. What happened? You create a false flag operation. You conduct an airstrike against Pakistan. Pakistan responds, and Pakistan ends it on the top. Again, you do the same thing in 2025. Because they wanted to push this narrative, continue with this narrative of terrorism, because the world is changing. The world does not recognize India's narrative as the genuine narrative. And every now and then, India needs this kind of injection of some event to make it look like done by the Pakistanis. And hence, Pakistan, the label on Pakistan must continue in the rest of the world. That strategy has failed.
Pointing to its counter-terror operations, dismantled networks, and internationally acknowledged compliance record. But the global environment is no longer what it once was. For years, allegations alone shaped perception. Today, that space has narrowed. India's position increasingly reflects a continuation of past patterns.
Top stories, the development that's taking place in Pahalgam.
A reliance on familiar rhetoric in a changing strategic environment. But the world is no longer responding in the same way. Where once accusations were readily amplified, today they are increasingly examined. Questions are being asked. Evidence is being demanded.
Pakistan-India context, or any threats that perhaps India may perceive as a threat to them in the terrorist domain, Pakistan may perceive as a threat, particularly those threats that we perceive within the Pakistan's domain. If Pakistan and India genuinely want to sort out these issues, there has to be cooperation, intelligence sharing. There's intelligence sharing between Pakistan and the international community, with Europe and with America, and they've been successful in thwarting terrorist attacks in their country. I'm sure we've been successful in thwarting. In fact, I know for a fact that when Pakistan and India did have cooperation on this front, and we did have communication on this front, as a result of Pakistani intelligence, the Indians were successful in thwarting terrorist activity. So if they're not even willing ultimately there has to be some sort of cooperation and coordination between our two countries if we're truly sincere as far as combating this terrorist challenge is concerned. So in a domain where Pakistan is more credible, more transparent, in that context, I think the international community is perceiving Pakistan's case as more strong than the Indian case in this context.
Recent episodes, including incidents like Pahalgam, have demonstrated a visible shift in international response. Instead of immediate alignment, global actors have emphasized restraint, verification, and substantiated claims.
The Pahalgam attack in Kashmir, which was a horrific attack that targeted tourists, killed 26 of them. Right after that attack, India blamed Pakistan. It said that Pakistan was responsible. India did not provide any type of evidence, at least not publicly, linking Pakistan to those attacks, to that attack. And that's one reason, I would argue, why India struggled to get the international support that it wanted during its conflict with Pakistan.
This shift reflects accumulated developments: Pakistan's sustained counter-terror operations, its dismantling of militant infrastructure, and its compliance with international frameworks. The removal from the FATF gray list was not symbolic. It was a formal acknowledgement of enforcement and sustained corrective action. In that context, the persistence of a singular narrative is becoming harder to sustain. The moment calls for reassessment, because regional stability cannot be built on accusation alone.
If India truly wants to become a major regional/global player, it can't when all of its neighbors have angst towards it or conflict with it. So forget Pakistan. I think purely for India's self-interest, it is critical that it improves its relationship with its entire region. But the current approach and the mindset of the government of India, I think, makes it virtually impossible for any neighbor to respect the bigger player. Regions grow when bigger players become magnanimous. Regions suffer when pettiness drives policies of those who can be magnanimous. Unfortunately, South Asia is hostage to that mindset right now.
If the past was defined by confrontation, the future demands engagement. Dialogue, not repetition, offers the only durable path forward. Beyond competing narratives lies a deeper question. What happens when great powers disengage, and who absorbs the aftermath?
U.S. have always been such U-turns, even today.
It is just criminal how the United States withdrew from Afghanistan.
The withdrawal in August of 2021 by the Biden administration was catastrophes.
Who's suffering? Pakistan is suffering. So blaming Pakistan for terrorism, I think, is not at all justified.
This is not just a story of war. It is a story of responsibility. Who armed the battlefield? Who disengaged without rebuilding? Who returned without an endgame? Who negotiated exit without inclusion? Who withdrew without a transition? Who faced the brunt? Whose cities absorbed the worst blowback? Whose economy bled the most? Who dismantled the terror networks? Who staged terror to accuse Pakistan? And when will the world stop blaming the wounded? The answers are not complex, but their implications are. Decisions made at global power centers carried consequences far beyond their origins. Wars may be left behind, but their consequences are not. They travel, they settle, they reshape nations. And for Pakistan, managing those consequences was never a choice. It was a necessity.